Leadership is all about capacity. And the last thing I want to weave into this is like, this is a much deeper form of coaching than I ever knew existed once I really started to get into the mastery of this, because it gets down to into the body. A lot of coaching, like, or therapy, is just talking. But the neuro part of NLP is like understanding how to get deeper than just the words. Like I said, it's understanding the deeper meaning from a beliefs perspective that is actually the thing neurochemically in your nervous system that's communicating with your body. And then the programming of how that actually shows up behaviorally in the decisions that you make to act or not act in certain ways. I think that is a much deeper form of intervention. Welcome to the Leadership Launchpad Podcast, the Legacy Edition, where conscious leaders unite to unlock their highest potential so collectively we can change the way the game is being played. Welcome back to the Leadership Launchpad Podcast, the Legacy Edition. I am back here next to my new co-pilot, Tracy Allen, in for the summer of conscious leadership here at the LLP. Tracy, how you feeling?
I'm feeling amazing.
Good.
Super excited for our conversation today. Get to learn a little bit more about you and your journey and how you can help our audience kind of tap into some really, really interesting tools. So I'm excited to be here.
Yeah, we're getting so much amazing feedback. Thank you to our audience. I want to start with the attitude of gratitude. The feedback's been rolling in on this new conscious leadership angle that we're exploring here in the summer of 2025. And yeah, it definitely seems to be resonating, including this new format where I get to pass you the puck and you get to pull back the curtains in terms of taking me down into the depths of my expertise. You were the one who helped me identify that blind spot. So who better than you to be able to do that for our audience? But yeah, the feedback's been really positive so far. So we're just so happy to hear that this is hitting the mark for our peeps. So that being said, we're in our new format. We had Meta in last week. And so this week we're turning the tables and you and I are just going to go back and forth and be able to share from our depths and breadths of wisdom. So what is it you have in store for me today? I am curious. I'm not going to lie.
Yeah. So I think one of the things I've been kind of thinking about is, and we talk about it, I think, very generally in a lot of conversations around coaching. And there's something really special about, I think, about your strategy of coaching. And I think one of the things that, unless you do the research and you do the actual digging into this on your own, it's really, really challenging for at the service level when we talk about coaching, leadership coaching, or we talk about NLP. There's a real differentiator there that I think is different than typical coaching. So I was thinking, like, how amazing would it be for you to kind of share with our audience what is your strategy there in terms of coaching and what got you curious about NLP and where it all started, so that people can really see where you kind of explored that and then where it took you. And then, the most important thing is really kind of the impact it has and the tools that people can really discover when digging into NLP, because it's quite different than just coaching, I would say, because there's different coaching modalities, right? But I think yours is very special. Being through it myself, it really was life-changing, and it's life-changing, but it also is something that, if you continue to practice, just puts you on a trajectory for growth and you stay in that, right? And that's where that high performance comes in and the flow. And we talk about conscious leadership, and it just kind of elevates you to that point. So why not share with everybody else how this all started for you, and then, give us some nuggets through that whole kind of process that you've learned through the NLP and the differentiation it brings to the table between the typical leadership and what you offer.
Mm. I love this as a hot seat focus question for this week's podcast. I feel like where I want to go is rewinding the game tape to where I first got the intuitive download that I, in fact, wanted to become a coach. I feel like, most people know my story in terms of how I played high performance hockey. It was my time at Princeton when I was in my imposter syndrome, hit the brick wall, started to tailspin as many of my high achieving clients do when they can no longer control the external results, right, in their environment, especially when you get into top 1% environments like that, high pressure, high stakes, kind of does a wonderful job of exposing all the insecurities, all the broken maladaptive strategies that we're running on as high achievers. So that was the starting point for me, is when I was first exposed to learning about my thoughts, my emotions, and what any of that had to do with how I was showing up on the ice and even in the classroom. And so I got exposed to some of that in the context of, hockey. We obviously had people like me coming in to speak about these things at a school like that, an NCAA Division I program. They have a lot of resources, obviously. It was also the time period when my dad passed away my freshman year, and that was the first time I'd ever really been asked to meet with a therapist. And so there was a healthy combination of these two things showing up for me my sophomore year, my second year at Princeton, which was right around the time when I needed to decide like where I was going to start to focus my studies. It's after our second year that we actually have to pick a discipline. And so all of that is what had me, on the path, I want to say, because anybody who's done this work knows that this type of transformation does not happen overnight. I was also like 19, 20 years old, and like this was my first exposure to this stuff. So I feel like that first chapter when I was at Princeton was really just about awakening that passion, right? For wanting to understand this whole other side of performance, which again, I'd spent all my time as an athlete training in a gym and on the ice. Nobody had ever told me that 90% of my performance was actually mental. And so that's when I started to double down in my studies, taking my psych classes and even sociology classes to understand group psychology, which obviously shows up in the work I do with leadership teams today. But all of that just was, again, I feel like the starting point, whetting the appetite and showing me that this, in fact, was something that was really in alignment with my sweet spot. So when I came out of school, I made a very conscious decision when I came back to Toronto to play pro hockey for 2 years. That was the time when I had to really kind of pick a lane in terms of where I was going to go for my post grad and how I wanted to show up in this space of, performance coaching. And I really made a conscious decision that I wanted to be a coach, not a therapist. Because for me, I came up in the gauntlet of sports. I had deep, deep appreciation and respect for how powerful it is to have somebody outside of you pointing out all your blind spots, right? And getting you to that next level with their strategies. So yeah, I feel like that's when I really started looking into I took like some of the, coaching certifications in terms of my baseline, but when it was time to actually select where I wanted my mastery to be, that was the time when I actually found NLP for the first time. And I'll tell you, there's a lot of reasons in terms of that. I feel like at the time I was reading a ton of Tony Robbins, I was like getting into this space of wanting to be a high performance coach. And this guy, for anybody who is not old enough to remember, is the OG in high performance coaching. He's the I think maybe still, but was the #1 high performance coach in the world when there weren't a lot of high performance coaches in the world, in fact. And I thought it was really cool because he was working with athletes and business professionals. And that was something that was really calling to me in terms of the space I wanted to play in my practice. And so Tony Robbins is an NLP guy. Most
Mhm.
people don't know this, but that's his mastery. And he talks so much about the power of state,
Yeah.
right? And all of this in terms of being able to program or reprogram, the subconscious part of your brain. And that, I think I was knee deep in understanding all of this method in the madness of NLP through him. And I also was recognizing just a lot of my training up until that point, I felt like was still just skimming the surface.
Mm.
This is like I had not yet gone down into the trenches of neuroscience, and I had not yet gone, beyond the points of talk therapy or talking to people in a coaching modality to try to affect change. And I thought all of that was wonderful
Mhm.
and totally useful, but it takes a long time to be able
Mm.
to see a shift or a change or an impact. And so that's what NLP is really notorious for, is the fact that it really gives you a toolbox of strategies that can give you an instant, right, shift or change in your state. And what NLP talks about, as you know, Trace, is that quality of state is what drives the quality of your results. And so
Mhm.
I was like, oh, yeah, like this is exactly what my high achievers are going to want. My high achievers are not patient folks. This is
Mhm.
why high achievers typically gravitate away from therapy, right? It's because it takes, a long time for the most part. If you've got some serious trauma or things that need to be worked through, but especially high achievers. I mean, high achievers I like to educate people on, are trauma informed. Most people don't realize that all this, right? This extremity of supercompensation in our nervous system that we call motivation is actually stress and anxiety, because we're trying to escape the pain of our childhood or our experiences in the backyard, And so all of that, I think, is what really got me investigating NLP. NLP, for anybody who out there who is not familiar with this acronym, it really stands for Neuro Linguistic Programming. The neuro in that phrase is all about our nervous system. The word neuro refers to our nervous system. Linguistic being our language, the stories that we use in our language, which obviously is the beliefs part of the work that I do in the mindset arena. And then programming. Programming really is how that shows up as patterns of behavior in terms of our autopilot. That's what our programming is. And so, yeah, this is where my mastery lives, because once I got into my NLP training, I saw the power and the potential of this practice, right? Like I said, it's something that really is going to give you tangible, tactical impacts in real time. And I think for high achievers, once they're able to work with those tools and those strategies that create those, relatively quick results. Not that that's everything, because NLP is also about going real deep in the subconscious mind so that you can actually learn how to locate those maladaptive patterns and programs, so that you can actually do that deeper work in terms of understanding how to reprogram and rehardwire your beliefs. But yeah, when high achievers can see that something works, again, very external locus of control folk, that obviously is what engages them to want to keep on that journey and to want to keep exploring what is possible when using this type of, coaching modality. And so I love NLP because it's so similar to everything that I, got mastery in as an athlete, which is really understanding, it all comes down to the resources that we have available to us. That's really what performance is all about. So whether we're in a gym training our body, right? So we can increase, resources like stamina or strength or
Mhm.
power. It's exactly the same thing that goes down in the mental gym when I'm do an NLP with my clients, right? It's like it's understanding how to expand our cognitive capacity subconsciously. So we actually have, a plethora of resources to play with in our performance. And to me, That's what max impact is all about. Playing your biggest impact game is all about training that capacity.
Mm-hmm.
Leadership is all about capacity. And the last thing I want to weave into this is like, this is a much deeper form of coaching than I ever knew existed once I really started to get into the mastery of this, because it gets down to into the body. A lot of coaching, like or therapy, is just talking, talking, talking,
Yeah.
talking. But the neuro part of NLP is like understanding how to get deeper than just the words. Like I said, it's understanding the deeper meaning from a beliefs perspective that is actually the thing neurochemically in your nervous system that's communicating with your body. And then the programming of how that actually shows up behaviorally in the decisions that you make to act or not act in certain ways. I think that is a much deeper form of intervention than I'd ever experienced in any of the things I'd been exposed to up until that point. And so that, real integrated approach to high performance coaching, again, all of that coming down to, we call it mindset strategy architecture. That's kind of like the language that I've created to describe my application of NLP alongside everything I've learned in sports and psych and neuroscience and all these other things. But yeah, like to me, that's what drives long-term behavior modification is understanding when we get to that step of depth in the
Mm-hmm.
subconscious mind, right? Where I really feel you're getting to the root of decision making and behavior, which drives results. That very much is a deeper experience of coaching and behavior modification because that's what ultimately leads to integration. And that's what we talk about a lot as our differentiation, right? Is the fact that, yeah, if you're not working at that depth and you don't see that type of integration, then it's not really going to stick. It's not really going to sustain. It's not going to take you, right, where you're trying to go sustainably. We're talking about state management, which obviously is hella valuable for a leader who's under a lot of pressure to be able to manage your stress so that you even can be present.
Yeah.
Because if you're stressed in an upregulated state, you're not in that room. You're up in your stories about tomorrow and yesterday. And your people can feel that. And that does affect engagement.
Maybe just for just to give an example, can you give
Mm-hmm.
like a simple example of like when you're working with a client, and it doesn't have to be life changing, just take
Mm-hmm.
something as simple as any small little trigger, for example, and the
Mm-hmm.
way that you kind of work through that and then the result of that, at the end, or you could take an example of somebody you've worked with. But I think it would be interesting for people to understand how, um, walking through that, how the possibility and the impact of the change could really affect them.
Mm. I feel like the thing I get feedback on the most, and it actually, like, a lot of people will sometimes question NLP, because like,
Yeah.
there's lots of information out there about every type of modality and practice in the world.
Right.
But yeah, like NLP is also very known for influence. It's the science of influence is another way that it's described. And so,
Um,
that can be used for good and that can be
yeah.
used for not good.
Mhm.
But I think it can freak people out how quickly I can catch a read,
Mhm.
Like how often do I get that feedback in terms of how did you know that?
Yeah.
Like what are you seeing that I'm not seeing? I feel like in NLP that was like the coolest thing for me is to be because like obviously in hockey I was taught to catch a read, But this is a much deeper form of that. When I'm sitting with somebody in the first 30 seconds, I can tell so much about where that person is at. And it has nothing to do, maybe a little tiny bit to do with the words that they're saying. The significance of the story that they're telling me is even based on the words that we use.
Right.
93% of our influence comes from the nonverbal stuff. 55% is being communicated just by how somebody is in their body language. When I come into a room, I can tell if somebody's like, closed off or if they're excited to see me. The other 38% coming from our vocal energy, the inflection, the tonality of our voice. And so That I feel like is something that is so applicable to my leaders. My leaders are
Mhm.
extremely busy folk and they have so much responsibility in terms of how many people they have to show up for on the daily and influence. So, a real practical example is like teaching my clients how to be able to catch that quick read in terms of the rooms that they're coming into. So they understand, again, my whole thing is the human centric approach, understand how to meet their people where they're at, so that they don't come in inappropriately high flying when somebody on their team is really going through it. Because that can just break trust and rapport right there on the jaw if the leader isn't able to be that deeply in tune to their people's experience. I
Mhm.
think it gets really fun when you understand how to meet someone where they're at with all of what you can pick up that they're throwing down nonverbally, but then to use things like matching and mirroring and meeting them where they're at to gain that trust and rapport to then be able to influence them up and out of those unresourceful spaces and places. I think that's where it gets really fun. Correct me if
Yeah,
I'm wrong. You're a client of mine, and I know
yeah,
how cool you thought that was when you first got introduced to it.
yeah, for sure. Well, there's so many things I think that are really, really important that I learned through the process that, like you said, you can go on about it for hours about the impact it has. But I think for me anyway, as a client, it's not a one and done. It is a journey, but the impact is long sustaining if you stick with it. And I think you talked a little bit about your high achievers, how they love to have the external validation and the proof coming in, but that proof and evidence is what actually gets you into the process of trusting that it's working,
Mm-hmm.
and that when you repeat and you get off autopilot and you make different decisions. We talk about conscious leadership too, is like having the capacity to even be conscious. I would say 5 years ago was a challenge for me, right? And now it's like when you make room for that stuff and you take away all the stories, because that's another, you know, thing that you and I worked on, is we all have our own kind of storyline happening. Um, and if you can't see that the story is not true, then you can't, you don't have the resources to see the possibilities that are out there,
Mm-mm,
right?
no. If you come into a room to try to catch a read and be deeply in tune so you can meet your people where you're at, that requires such deep presence and
Yes.
consciousness as
Mm-hmm.
the portal to all of that influence and
Mm-hmm.
impact, right?
Mm-hmm.
And so I think that that is maybe somewhere we can go on another show, right? Is just in terms of
Mm-hmm.
understanding. We're talking about state management, which obviously is hella valuable for a leader who's under a lot of pressure to be able to manage your stress so that you even can be present.
Yes.
Because if you're stressed in an upregulated state, you're not in that room. You're up in your stories about tomorrow and yesterday. And your people can feel that. And that does affect engagement. But I think that that's what's so cool about NLP is NLP is what taught me how to use that limited 3 to 5% on average that we have of conscious awareness for
Mm-hmm.
both those purposes, right? For understanding how to affect change in real time based on
Mm-hmm.
whatever's coming your way, but
Mm-hmm.
also in terms of being able to use that conscious flashlight at these depths in terms of those backstories that
Mm-hmm.
are what set up your blueprint of beliefs, your self concept, your identity, the way you relate to yourself, and thus show up and relate to the world, right? And then we haven't even talked about the future oriented aspect of all of this in terms of understanding how to program those resources, right? Understanding how to create that proof and evidence for things that you have not even experienced yet, to
Mm-hmm.
make that feel so as real as the memories from yesterday, and just how powerful a strategy that can be. Yeah, so this is the strategic aspect, obviously, of my coaching process. It's obviously how I take high achievers into becoming high performers, right? Is understanding how to pull that locus of control inward and to be consciously at that home in our self leadership, using all of these tools and tactics that NLP has taught me And then putting that together in strategic ways, which really is about understanding no matter what your goal is, no matter what's going on in and around you that's affecting that goal, just understanding how to create a strategic game plan to being able to actualize on that potential.
Mhm.
I think that's what's so exciting and so cool about the science of NLP.
Yes.
I feel like we didn't
And
leave enough time to ask you any questions today, but can you give us a really quick example just in terms of something in real time that's going on in corporate right now or with your teams, like a real practical example of how what I just described might be showing up on your play?
yeah, I think, you know, I think we didn't go in deep in, but it's about, we talked about state management. I think that is like, absolutely crucial in a room. And that's what people can feel the most, I would say. Not so much what you're saying, but how you're showing up in terms of your emotions and your state. And that might come into verbal. But I would say that, one of the things that I feel is so important, and I've learned it, working with you, is around self-leadership and really coming back to ourselves. And I think that, in any job or any workplace, I think it's so important that people understand that they are, the creator of their destiny, right? And I think it's the safest place to be. And I always say that to my people, right? Is that you don't want me to be in charge of your future. You don't want the company to be in charge of your future, any company. The safest place is for you to be in charge of your own destiny. So I use the metaphor of, driving your own bus. Would you let somebody else drive your bus and take you wherever? No, you want to be that person driving the bus. So what does that mean? Well, that means that you actually make the decisions. You actually take action for what you want in your life, right? And that allows you to choose and to own what you want. But if you don't take that step forward to actually own that and take action and take responsibility for yourself,
Mm-hmm.
it's very hard to make all these external things line up for you if you are just waiting for this to happen, right? So it's not that I don't believe in the universe, because you and I talk about that stuff, but you and I also talk about that we are co-creators with the universe, and we need to step in to action and own our responsibility on how we're showing up in the world, right?
Mm-hmm.
And for me, that's probably the biggest gift you can give your people, right? I mean, there's so many topics we could go through, but I would say that has been probably the biggest game changer for me, is that I no longer am here for the ride that this life is giving me. I am actually the one choosing. And, maybe sometimes we don't like what's showing up for us, but being able to see that it's there for the better good of what is next for me is a gift, right? And people living in waiting for things to happen to them and everything is happening to them, they're not actually part of it, is so, so not fun to go through. And I have so much compassion for that because I've been there.
Mm-hmm.
But I see that the work that you and I have done, I no longer sit there anymore. I'm at the helm. I am driving where I'm going, and I'm choosing and picking the directions I want to go. And now I'm even, what we're talking about, which is consciousness, not even just driving it. I am like, I got this, and I can go here and I can go there, but I am like aligned with what I want and trusting that the next thing for me is going to be fine, but at least I made that choice.
Mm-hmm.
So I always say, life is not happening to you. That's not a good place. You are making this life what you want, is what you want our
Mm-hmm.
people to say, right?
Mm-hmm.
So as a leader, that has been, I think, a gift is something that I tried to ripple effect through my organization, because I want people to feel empowered and I want them to feel in charge of their life, even if they can't control everything in it. But knowing yourself and knowing the value and knowing how to show up and having the resources to be able to see the possibilities is like, that's where the state just kind of lights up and you're like, I'm ready for anything.
I love
And
it.
that's what we want, right?
Yeah, it's definitely happening for you. I love you just gave a whole masterclass on empowerment there. I feel like, from victim to victor is what we talk about, right? Why is this happening to me? To like, ooh, curious. Why is this showing up for me today? The good, the bad, the ugly. As long as we can show up to what's showing up in that really resourceful way, this is very much an NLP frame right here, then we know that we're going to be able to utilize whatever that is that's showing up to our best and highest good. And like that whole word and truth bomb that you just dropped around responsibility, most people have such a busted up association even with the word responsibility. Like a lot of my leaders come through, my high achiever leaders coming through my door for the first time. It's like, oh my God, I have so many responsibilities. It's like they don't recognize like the gift that is buried in all of that, because especially self-responsibility, because when we claim self-responsibility, which is what all this stepping to the helm and our self-leadership thing is about, that's where we become powerfully responsible. That's where we go from powerless to powerful. And who the heck doesn't want that? That's a portal to your growth and development and impact ultimately. And all of that, I think, is like definitely, the through line in everything that we've talked about today is the power of consciousness and understanding the difference between giving that 3 to 5% of limited conscious resource away to the externals, away to the things we can't control and the people that control our destiny, right? And then actually awakening that power within by learning how to strategically work with that conscious resource in ways that are going to empower you. Because no matter what is being dealt your way, that's the best probability for success in that equation, right? Is when you're able to step into it in a really resourceful way that oftentimes catalyzes even more growth and potential.
Agreed.
Woo! I knew I was going to love this new platform and this new format that we're exploring. I feel like that was me and you just catching a riff in a session right there. This is why we were so enthusiastic to be able to share this with our peeps. I know that we don't want to waste too much more time of your busy day, but we really are hoping that you are resonating with this new format as much as we are loving it and loving bringing it to you. As you heard us talk about at the top of the show, we are so grateful for the feedback that has been rolling in. We are in the year of co-creation, and we are very consciously at the helm with looking for that wherever we can find it to ensure that we are innovating the best possible podcast that we can bring you, right, on the weekly. So please, please, please hit us with that feedback. You can email me, Susan at elitehighperformance.com. I'd love to hear if this is resonating, if there's different areas and spaces you want us to dig or explore, potential guests that you think it would be really cool for us to interview. Nothing's off the table, as Tracy said in our first podcast. So please send your thoughts and ideas and valuable insights our way for the purposes of, optimizing this experience for all of us. We are so grateful to have you tuning in here each week. The last thing that I'd like to say is please, please, please share this episode with a friend, with your teammates, with a conscious colleague, or somebody that is on this journey or looking to get on this journey too. And don't forget to hit like and subscribe on your way out the podcast platform door. For all other inquiries on all of this NLP that we've been talking about today, this NLP high performance coaching, mindset coaching, leadership coaching, you can head over to the website elitehighperformance.com, where you find all the information that you can about all of our different offerings and programs, including an opportunity to have 30-minute consult for free with me if that feels aligned for you. Tracy, any final thoughts before we send our folks out these locker room doors this week?
No, I think it was great. I think I loved how you break down the NLP, and hopefully people get curious and can go dig into that a little bit more. You made me want to go pick up Tony Robbins' latest book now. I think I might have to do that for fun. So awesome breakdown. Thank you for helping our people with that.
Thank you for digging that out of my well. I'm so grateful to have your perspective on what would be valuable for our peeps. I feel like you know better than anybody how to expose that golden nugget, in terms of my experience. So thank you everybody for tuning in. We'll see you next week where we'll have another fabulous conscious leader guest back in here. Until then, have a fabulous week and we'll see you next time.